we're going to ask you a simple question. And depending on how you answer this question will determine if you should continue watching the video. Number one, do I want to add more value to my business? And number two, do I want to continue to leverage technology to improve my business? And the answer is yes, this is for you. If the answer is no, just go up to the top right of your screen, hit that X button, and don't watch any further. So when you ask that question about, just say you're in business and you have a need, or you have a problem, instead of going to your IT provider immediately and say, hey, go do this for me, we're going to challenge you to change your approach. And instead of saying, hey, here's a list of things I need you to do to go make happen, ask yourself, or even ask your service provider, hey, I have a problem. I have a challenge, X, Y, Z. What do I do, Mr. Service Provider?
Well, I think I'd frame this, or I'd look at this from the lens of, consider the idea that IT, and all of us that work in IT, we are here to support the business. But as IT has become a much larger part of business and has really matured into a business function, that doesn't necessarily mean that it should be working at the direction of the business. Business professionals have always been comfortable with the idea that there are areas of expertise, which is why you build a team, because you can't be an expert in everything, right?
All right.
And so from that perspective, this isn't really about service provider necessarily. This could be your internal IT team, but I think it does, speak to a group of small business owners. Let's say, maybe 100 employees and below. The problem exists above that level, but just as a general guideline, that there's been such significant change, the businesses haven't grown with the change in technology, at least from an operational perspective.
Right.
From a decision-making perspective. They've certainly found ways to engage the technology. They've certainly found ways to, benefit from the technology, but they haven't fully incorporated technology into their business from a perspective of maturing processes, handling risk, being able to really govern what's happening within their organization. And it's because again, the business hasn't caught up with the level of technology. So utility is there, right? As we talk about, there's a difference between making something work and making something work well. But that's the next stage that has to happen. And that's kind of how we see this, right? Is there's this, we'll call it misalignment or gap really for small business IT, or small businesses and how they use their IT, that right now, business leaders and IT providers, whether they're in-house or outsourced, they're on the same page, but they're not connected necessarily to what the business has needed or needs. That those changing needs aren't being recognized by either side of the equation, and largely that's tied to what you're talking about, which is what's the decision-making process? How do I leverage the technology to have a better business outcome? And so that's where it's got to start. You've got to recognize that as the starting point before you can improve the downstream results.
Absolutely. And when you talk about a better business outcome, I think for us, we really look at it in three layers, right? What does a better business outcome really refer to? A, I want to generate more revenue in my business. It's a better business outcome. B, I want to reduce the cost or reduce my expenditures for my business. That's a better outcome. Or C, I want to reduce risk and lower the risk profile for my business overall. Those are all better business outcomes. And going back to the point I mentioned earlier, when you approach your service provider, Mark, you said you typically on the same page, but if you're not looking at it from that perspective that I just mentioned, or looking at it for the better business outcome like you alluded to, it's hard to be on the same page. And so when you ask those questions, I mean, really, this question beforehand is that question that you're going to ask your IT provider. How does it fit in to those three pieces? Is that question that you're going to ask them to do, will it have an impact, or will the outcome fall in one of those three categories? If the answer is yes, great, right?
Well, real quick, I'd argue that that's almost purely a business decision. You, as the business leader, should already
100%.
understand that, right? And you should be able to communicate that to the IT guy or team who is delivering the outcome, so they know what they're trying to align with. That's usually missing.
Yeah, I
Right.
know exactly, right? That's the point is if you before you bring that question, you should ask yourself, this question I'm about to bring my IT provider, does it yield an answer that falls in one of those three categories? Because if the answer is no, why is this a problem for you? If it's not going to improve your business, what is it doing? Why is it a problem? I mean, that's and your point, that's not has nothing to do with technology, it's everything to do with how you run your business.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think, extending what you're talking about there, once you've answered that question for yourself, right? If it can fall into one of those answers, then you've got to talk about, how do I make it happen, right? But coming back to, again, how do you define value for the business? There's probably a lot of opinions on that, and it's all subjective. I think what our position would be is simply that they all manifest themselves as one of those three things. I mean,
Correct.
even if you're a nonprofit, right, you're not necessarily thinking of revenue the same way that everybody else does. But at the end of the day, it's income, right? You are trying to maximize, donations, whether that's time or money,
Right.
from volunteers. So that's how you garner resources to be able to accomplish your mission and to be able to manage the ongoing day-to-day work in your environment. And then, of course, how efficient you are will impact the expense, which then is basically this profit equation, right? Nobody wants to, or not nobody, lots of small businesses like to think of this in terms of, more, what they think I would say is more evolved or more, I don't know, not money hungry, right? But at the end of the day, profit is what drives businesses. Without profit, you can't achieve anything else. And profit is just simply income minus expense. There's nothing more basic than that as far as, making your decisions and running your business. And then, of course, the risk component of that is, how do I prevent things from disrupting my income minus expense equation, right? And so if you're very structured and disciplined around that, every time you are looking at any kind of decision, IT related or not, you should be able to easily express what you want to achieve in those terms. And so, not to really, beat that concept to death, but I think it's an important, an important component that my experience with small businesses in particular is missing a lot of the times, that we just, we as a provider don't understand the connection. And when we look for that clarification, we're not able to get it because that work hasn't been done by the business themselves. And the real challenge is that most times an IT team is looking to complete some work or change. They're not asking that question. And that goes back to what I was talking about, this misalignment, that the business needs you aware of that, but both the provider and the consumer are not at this point.
Yeah, I go back to every business owner should ask themselves, there's a reason why you decided to get started in business. There was something that you saw that you said, hey, I think I can fix this. I think I can address this problem. I think I can do this better, right? Some of those reasons are reasons why you and I decided to go into business. But if we can go back to the core reason of why you went into business, that's great. But then how do I stay in business? And I think if you go back to the core and you ask yourself, how can I stay in business? Those three questions we just mentioned are foolproof ways, really, to help you stay in business. You generate more revenue or income, regardless of your business type. you reduce the expenses, and you reduce your level of risk. By taking that approach and choosing good business partners or vendors to work with, what's going to happen is when you take that stance that every decision, every business decision I make, whether it's adding technology, whether it's expanding a practice, whether it's opening up another brick and mortar facility, whatever that is, when you start to design this practice and you bring it under the vendors, you will be in a better position to performance manage them. Because if you know how to answer those questions, when you present the task at hand or the challenge at hand, you are going to know how to frame them in a way that when you said that we're aligned, if you are aligned like that, understanding which one of those three things I want to pursue or want to add in my business, when you go find a partner, you're going to know right away if they're aligned with you. Because if especially when you talk about technology, if they're not looking at it that way, like you are, probably not a good partner to work with, because it's not apples to apples. And you want someone who understands your vision, understands your business, understands your mission and your goal, to be able to come alongside you and work in tandem with you to get the expected outcome, right?
Well, yeah, I agreed. Going upstream one step, though, is you probably have to change how you think about it.
100%.
Right? When you're talking about finding that alignment, are you aligned with what your business needs? Are you recognizing what the business needs from that? And again, technology has really been overlooked. Again, it's just recently, and I say recently, last 5-10 years, really maturing into a business function that needs this level of attention and detail from a decision-making standpoint versus just an execution standpoint. And small businesses, they compress a lot of things. They have to. Small businesses often feel like they have to do more with less, although I'd argue that's a little bit more, you've got to simply achieve more with less, meaning that you've got to be smarter about how you use your resources. It's not the fact that you, I don't want to call it a return, but what you get from what you expend has to be better. You have less margin for error, right, in terms of bad decisions. And so you've got to look at it that way. And then, to your point, find somebody who looks at it that way as well, because this is the part of the equation where we're talking about, are the business consumer, or excuse me, the IT consumers aligned with what the business needs? And I'd say largely they're not right now.
Correct.
They're aligned with what the IT providers are, because that's the way it's always been. And this is evolving and it's changing and it's growing. But because of everything to do with complexity, security, compliance, all of these needs, it has to change. It already has changed. In fact, you're just behind if you hadn't. And so getting, those two things to look at it, going back to what you were talking about with, business outcomes. I mean, we've got, I don't know, 2 or 3 situations in the last, 30 days or so where, with clients that we've worked at, like, they recognized an opportunity or a problem within their business that involves some changes in technology. And that first question, as you were going back to, doesn't need to be, or the first request, the engagement shouldn't be, I've decided I'm doing X, please go make this happen.
That's right.
To your IT team. It's really, listen, I've decided, or I've identified this particular opportunity or change that we need to look at. How can technology help me with this? Because in all of those situations, once we became involved with the process for evaluating it, what they learned was that the cost of this process was going to be more than they recognized at the beginning. And it changes your value equation, right? In terms of whether or not you want to make the investment for something. And that's the part that isn't happening a lot. Small businesses are recognizing after the fact, after they've spent the dollars, that, man, that wasn't worth what I ended up spending initially. It might have been worth what I thought I was going to spend, but then it became 2x, 3x.
And there's one thing I'll mention here, and this is kind of funny because we're a technology company, but we focus more on risk. But I'll say this for small business owners listening: the easiest way to identify some of these things and some of these changes you might have to make in your business, and I really love that Mark and I do this very well, is networking. Right? If you're in your trade or in a specific business situation, especially if you're like an attorney or you're in the medical field, I guarantee you in your area, there are plenty of other practices, practitioners, professionals that have been in business probably longer than you have and have gone through the ringer with some of these things. Now, I'm not suggesting that hey, what did you choose to do this? Right? Hey, what technology you choose? That's fine. But you want to get better at asking deeper questions about their business and understanding it, because I guarantee you, to what Mark just said, there are probably people who chose technology, and if you asked them what it was like, they'd probably tell you, oh gosh, it was a pretty challenging experience. That right there to me is gold. When you can figure out the challenges that they've had, those are the things you need to pay attention to, because you take those challenges that they experience and ask yourself, do I have some of those same challenges experience in my businesses? Could what they did, the action of adding new technology, increase my revenue? Could it reduce my expenses? Now that you're starting to accumulate this information, that's going to help you as a business owner make those better decisions, ask the better questions that you're referring to, Mark, before you even go and engage your vendor partners out there. So networking to me is one of the I think missing pieces. Most people don't, because they're in this competitive realm saying, oh gosh, I don't want to meet with my competitors because they might try to steal something from me. In essence, then listen, businesses are not going away. Small businesses are certainly not going away. And I think there's way more value that's being missed out there because of this lack of open communication and networking in the industries as a whole.
Well, this is where the fractional support piece comes in. And again, we do that in IT, but it exists in finance and HR and marketing and so forth. All of those, sort of C-suite activities, the business function activities that we're talking about, you can get a lot of that information from peers. Like you're talking about, like, what are their experiences? But what you can do when you're working with a fractional provider is they've seen, small businesses might make changes once every couple of years, every 3 years or whatever. And they can't remember what happened when they did it last time. Plus, they're missing some of the expertise that comes with those changes anyway.
That's right.
But you do it with somebody who's fractional, who sort of specializes in that. They're making those changes multiple times a year. And they're also invested in, learning and iterating from each of those processes. So you can sort of stand on their shoulders to get those outcomes that you're talking about as well. And to your point, that's not necessarily about choosing this technology or that technology. It's the process to get to where you were choosing a particular technology and then implementing and so forth. So yeah, again, this is all about where we think that misalignment lives, right? Is that it's not about the implementation of or the maintenance of IT as much as it is about how did we get to that place where we're implementing or maintaining a specific technology. It's how do we understand the decisions that get us there and recognize what the true impact to our business is going to be. That's the part we're trying to solve.
Yeah. So as we come to a close here, Mark, I'll just ask this: if there was one good piece of recommendation for small business owners to get better at asking the right questions about their business, where would you point them to? Where would you have them start?
So there's four aspects of this, I think, that come for good IT, right? Which is the idea that you've got to have some governance in place, which is policies, procedures. What are we doing with our IT? There's risk management. Do we understand, what threats are presented to our business and how are we managing them? Do they matter? Do they not? Again, just managing the risk of it. There's the technology itself, which is, do we have the right technology? Is it that, our people understand how to use it and are using it? Are we adopting the technology we've invested in? And then there's the security of it, which is the idea of, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your technology. Are you securing that, and are you, able to confirm that you're securing that? Those four components have to come with your technology, whoever's doing it for you, right? Again, it could be that there's an outsourced provider, could be that there's in-house IT, but in this space that we, talk to is kind of our audience, which is that, 100, 150 below, you're either outsourcing all or some of this. And if you have in-house IT, it's unlikely one person can do all of those areas. That's the lens that you have to look at IT through to be able to do the things we talked about, which is the idea of, increasing value to those three areas. But of course, if you aren't really that committed to doing those things, none of this really matters, right? So, the big caveat is, do you want to run a better business? And if you do, this is how you get there through IT. If you don't, no problem, carry on.